All right. We are now time traveling with Ben Garchar, who I have just introduced. I'm going to briefly recap what he said so far, which is that, or what has been said, which is that Ben is pretty unique because since finishing film school in Dayton, Ohio, that was Wright State University, he has only ever worked in the movie business. He has never got a fast food job. He has never waited tables. He has never done data entry. He has never worked construction. All the money that he has ever made as an adult has been from the movie business, and that is currently how he pays his rent. And presumably makes payments on his student loans. I don't know. That's maybe personal, but
I mean, luckily they're going to a shout out to a state university, public university. So, I got a film school education, and my debt was not astronomical.
Right.
It would probably be less than some people have for 1 year if they go to sort of a bigger private institution.
Right.
So, I do not have student loans right now, which is great.
That's amazing. I'm very jealous. We should get married so I can get my credit down.
There you go.
And I think I mentioned earlier before we started time traveling that Ben worked on an Oscar-nominated short documentary called The Last Truck, and he was about to tell us what that was about after giving us a little bit of background about his film school experience, his filmmaking experience, and maybe you can tell them how we know each other.
Sure. Well, starting with how we met each other in the film program I went to at Wright State. Do I refer to you as Mr. Zohar?
Whatever you want, man. You can.
I'll say yeah. I went to film school with Yo's twin brother, and I got to know him. And then you were in Columbus at Ohio State. We would cross paths sometimes, and then we happened to move to New York. Pretty much around the same time, so we hooked up from there. In terms of working on The Last Truck, it was about a GM SUV plant that was getting shut down, which was also in Dayton, Ohio. The filmmakers who ran the film program that I attended, Julia Reichert and Steve Bognar, have a long history of documenting sort of political events, social events, almost exclusively in that Southwest Ohio region, where they're from and where they live. They live in the same town, Yellow Springs, which Dave Chappelle also calls his home. Check him out. Maybe not quite age appropriate, but very smart.
Yeah, I
Check
think
him out at some point.
some of his subject matter is appropriate. Some is not. If we're talking about quote unquote age appropriate, some of it is sweary. So a little bit of swearing, a little bit of smoking.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah. Sorry, please continue.
So I happened to be a senior in that film program when they started to make that film, and they hired me as I did some camera stuff, did some assistant editing, and just sort of, it was a small thing. It was them and me and a couple other people from time to time, and so I sort of just helped them out with whatever they needed, and it was a good kind of real world learning experience. And then once HBO became interested in the film and they wanted to air it, I think that's sort of when the Oscar thing kind of comes into play. Because for the Oscars, you sort of need like an HBO or these days like a Netflix to really help you sort of push your campaigning for that. So I think those two things come hand in hand.
Right on. Alice asks, what is it that you do in the movie biz?
These days, it's almost always some sort of editing, whether it be a lot of documentary stuff. I've done some sort of written narrative scripted stuff. Not that there's a huge difference between the two, as Yo and I can discuss.
And we briefly touched on that during our lesson. We did a brief lesson on documentary filmmaking a few weeks ago. So.
Yeah. And then some promo stuff too. Like I'm sort of in between sort of 2 rounds of editing a longer documentary now. A lot of times with documentaries, they're funded by grants and things. So there's some money, and then you take a break, and then they get another grant, and you start. So the last job that I did was like a promo piece for an art gallery. So there's all sorts of different things.
And you mentioned funding. When we started our motion picture unit, 6-7 weeks ago, something like that, we had a conversation about the role that money plays in the movie business and how it kind of shapes the way that this business looks compared to other art forms. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could sort of talk about it in 2 levels. In that, one, money really matters, and to some degree, money doesn't. It sort of depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you take a movie like a Marvel movie or something, if you think about the amount of people that are needed to just build that world, forget about the actors who you see and all that. But any, crazy background that you see, in space and forth, there are probably a team of 25, 30 artists that are creating that from scratch. You've probably talked about some in your class. There's someone has to design lighting. It doesn't exist. Lighting happens, shadow happens. Details, shaping, all that. So think about like the thousands and thousands of people that have to work on that. It's like making a movie like that is like creating a business for 2 years or whatever.
It's not just like walking outside, pointing a camera and shooting a scene. They are fabricating every single element of what you see from scratch almost. So
exactly, and in a lot of cases too, what you see and what you hear. Most of what you hear in a movie is not captured as they're filming. If you hear something, explode, and then you hear all the, sort of debris float around, and, big surround sound theater, that is all sort of meticulously placed and designed. So that's a team of people too.
And all these people have to get paid.
Yeah, because they have families and they have houses and all of that. And then on the second hand, I'll say money doesn't matter at all, because if you just have an idea that you can make yourself, and the idea is compelling, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you just go out with your phone and make something. I imagine that's a sort of a similar mode in which you've worked to make the films in class.
Right.
So you can see, is it going to look like a Marvel movie? Probably not. That would be hard. Although certainly if you had the tools and wanted to learn all that, you could, but it might take a year to finish a 1-minute movie.
Right.
But the most important thing is, is a compelling story, and you can capture that with a phone and, yourself and a few friends.
And these students have done that.
Yeah.
Really, in a really amazing way. Alice also wants to know 2 things. She says, is it just me or do you guys look alike?
Do we? I don't know. I think we've gotten at before. I don't really think about it.
Let's see. Well, we're both white dudes with glasses, so we'll start with that.
And beards.
And beards. So yes, probably just enough, Alice. Just enough for you. And she also wants to know. She says, "Okay, what's the environment you work in?" Alice, do you mean like what editing software does he use, or do you mean like what kind of culture of filmmaking is Ben involved in?
And it might mean like is it the Marvel universe of like a big team,
like big
or like
budget,
smaller
right.
teams?
What exactly did you wait?
Yeah.
So Alice, the second one you meant like what types of movies, what types of movie making environment? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really been involved with the super big team thing. It's usually like myself and the director and maybe a couple of producers, because I have worked mostly on documentary and not super huge budget fiction things. Things are relatively small, and I kind of like that. I mean, I can't speak to working in like a huge machine type film. I mean, that's probably fun too. But I mean, I like being able to, sort of a one-on-one relationship with whoever I'm collaborating with.
Yeah. And you've been able to make a career of that. It's not like you've had to, because you're working on these smaller budget productions, it's not like you had to, do this as a side gig or like moonlight. So what would you tell, so like some of you all made movies in this class. Some of you may have actually enjoyed doing that. I can't verify. I mean, I would say that it's like this for me as a teacher. When I'm looking at the work that you did, generally what happens is the more you enjoy making something artistic, the more that comes through in your work, and the better the quality of the work. So what I'm going to ask the students is, did if that's something that you really enjoyed, is that something that you could see yourself doing again, or possibly like even for money later on down the road? And when I say doing it for money, I don't mean like appearing at the Oscars in a fancy dress. I mean like that nitty gritty stuff that you were involved in a couple weeks ago. And that's a rhetorical question. You don't all need to like chime in and answer, but keep that answer in your mind while I turn to Ben and ask, how do you make a career doing this? What were the steps, and how is it that you're now able to actually support yourself in Brooklyn, New York, in this line of work?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with time and patience, I think. I mean, just for example, and also working for my professors did help. I did have a little bit of an edge there in that I worked on something that people actually recognize. So I have to say, little caveat there. I mean, I don't know what my situation would have been necessarily.
So
I mean,
you got a
if I
leg
could
up
say
by,
I worked on this.
In art school, we called this networking. It meant that you developed inroads for yourself by creating those positive professional connections with the people who you were around, who you had access to.
Regardless, you're gonna have to do that, and it's really how you end up getting jobs. It's not like someone out of the blue contacts you, unless you're like really well known, I guess. But your jobs, and I can speak to this, the jobs I've gotten sort of all stem from sort of social and professional network. And I'm not a super networky person. I would rather just sit in my room and edit and not have to deal with that. But these are the things, if you're like introvert like me, you have to push a little bit to make those connections. That little, you don't want to change yourself completely. Being an introvert is fine. I love it. But there are certain things that you can and should push yourself to to do.
So you're describing a kind of incremental process where
Yeah.
you made one important connection and that led to another connection and that led to another connection. And before you knew it, you had a career in your lap.
Right. And to speak to the patience a little bit too. I mean, the first job that I had, and you probably remember this, for 2.5 years, I worked a night shift doing assistant editing, which was pretty tedious. I mean, it was for a documentary. I worked. What was that?
Was that the one in Dumbo?
It started in Dumbo and then moved to Midtown at some point. And yeah, I worked 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., which is not like crazy overnight, but it's still, it's not quite a normal schedule.
Those and are like
the work was pretty, yeah. And the work was pretty tedious. I was just importing like images and renaming things and all that. But you just sort of have to have patience and going through that and taking what you can from it. And then I think assessing to what point have you stopped learning things, and then maybe that's when it's time to look for something else. But that's always hard, and I'm not so great at that. I'll usually try and be comfortable for as long as possible, when maybe I should have tried to leave that job sooner or whatever. But it's hard when you have and that was a full-time gig. So,
and would you say that of the various careers in motion pictures, is editing one of the steadier gigs that you can get? Like, a lot of people think of, like, if you tell them you're going to go into movies, right? The assumption is either you're going to be an actor or a director. Are you going to act or direct? But we don't hear about people being like, yeah, I want to be a gaffer.
Right. Sure.
So how would you say editing ranks in terms of like the reasonably rational career choices?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer it in two ways. I think it certainly can be a very steady thing, especially if you get into the feature world, and especially documentary features. Because if you think about the amount of footage that you have and you have to construct everything after the fact, it's just that it takes a lot of time. It could take a year, 2 years, whatever. So that can certainly be a good steady gig. I never really look at things longer than a year or 2 years.
Yeah.
But hopefully on the feature you make connections for the next feature and all that stuff. And then in terms of like smaller things, if you think about media and how prevalent video is everywhere, it might not be editing that you love, and it might seem, kind of just like throwaway content, but those jobs are there. Right. And if you think about sort of the patience and the networking and all of that, if you start there and sort of actively try and maneuver your way, making friends, making connections. Maybe there's 2 or 3 people doing these, kind of dumb videos, but you connect and you think about things the same way, and then you veer off and maybe try and do your own thing, and that's the time. Right. Eventually, if you just keep doing it and you have a sense of where you want to go, I think you will get there. Maybe not 100%, but to a certain extent, you'll get to where you wanna be.
Indeed. Alice asks, Alice, thank you for carrying your whole class with the question asking. She wants to know, why did you choose this career?
It's a good question. I chose it, I think initially because when I was probably around your age, maybe a little bit older, I guess high school, but I had a a strong interest in technology, not even movies, really. And I thought the idea, I mean, maybe I'll lose you guys here, but I had a strong interest in buying a DVD player. It was like, oh, this is sort of a cool way to watch movies, and it looks better than before. At the same time,
So you started out doing some consumer research, basically.
pretty much, yeah. And so just because I had the DVD player, I started watching more movies, because why would you buy it and not use it? At the same time, my high school offered a photography class. And so watching more movies and having the experience of looking through a camera and framing, that was sort of the spark for me. That's really how it started. I didn't know it would be a career necessarily, but.
So Ashley wanted to know, was there a different career you wanted to pursue before filmmaking? Sounds like watching DVDs.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember a point before I figured out that filmmaking was the thing, and I didn't really know. And I'm talking maybe junior year in high school, and sort of senior year in high school, I sort of figured out this is what I wanted to do. But I could only think of in terms of things that I liked. Like I liked history class, even though no one else really seemed to like history class, but I liked history class. So I thought in terms of that. But yeah, I think the most honest answer is I wasn't really sure. You know, high school, I was mostly thinking about cross country and running.
Yeah, Ben has been a prolific. That's not the right word. A terribly active runner his whole life.
Yeah, it's something I'm glad I did, because I have the baseline. Although pandemic has not been the best for exercise, but now that gyms are back, where I'm vaccinated, and I feel like I can go to a gym, I'm excited to start that.
Right on.
Yeah.
Two more questions again from Alice. Was there a person or something that influenced you throughout your career, and also why do you like technology and history?
Let's see. Person. I don't know. I'm trying to think if there was
or like big influences, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this is sort of generic and kind of a starting point, but the first film appreciation class that we took in college used Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock, who's a film director from a long time ago.
One of the names, unfortunately, that we did not cover because we had the condensed espresso version of motion picture.
Right. But you can explore him on your own if you would like. But you used him as a just sort of a teaching device, learning device of just sort of basic storytelling and where a camera goes and how to use a camera expressively. And when you're just watching movies on your own, before critically thinking about it, that was a big eye opener for me, just to be able to start to look to movies in a different way. Now, beyond Hitchcock, there's certainly lots of interesting things, maybe even more interesting things. But since he's sort of an accessible teaching tool, and I understand why they started.
His movies are pretty simple. It's not like he's using a lot of I don't know. They're not the most heavily nuanced, obtuse, inaccessible motion pictures. He's not Crispin Glover.
Right.
So that's something that a good entry point into any art making is to find somebody who kind of puts it out there and doesn't hide a lot, because you can learn a lot from those people. Why technology and history? And Ashley wants to know, how did your family react to you wanting to become filmmaker? And I actually have a follow-up question to that.
Great. Okay. So technology and history. Let's see. Technology, we came of age when computers were introduced into our lives at a fairly young age. I think I was around second or third grade. And I just sort of became fascinated with it, and I always like to take apart things.
And back in the day when you and I were first getting, like when we were first getting personal computers in the home, they were things that you ordered kind of like the way you'd order a burrito at Chipotle. Like you kind of tell them what you want on it, and they build it for you. And it's something that comes with screws in the back that you can unscrew, take apart, and kind of mess with the components. If any of you have gaming computers, they still kind of work that way. But back then it was like the computing power of like not even a flip phone that you might find in an attic. It was
like this is probably 35 times more powerful than that first computer.
That might be an understatement, but yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, even in college, I sort of built my own PC. So that stuff has always been interesting. So I think because it was new and like sort of building things, taking apart things, that's technology. History, I don't know. I've always been interested in what was this before I was here?
I mean, what's not to be interested by, with history? I think history is something that you become interested in just because you start experiencing life, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
Who, if you meet somebody who's not interested in history, you need to be careful.
Right. Yeah, you can learn everything about the present from the past.
Yeah, I would give that person a wide berth if you meet somebody who says they're not interested in history. Word to the class.
Right.
So the other question was,
family, right?
Yeah. Well, how did your family react to you coming out as a filmmaker?
They were supportive. I initially was angling to go to a more vocational type school, not necessarily a degree program like a New York Film Academy or something like that. They were a little, I wouldn't say concerned about that, but they were sort of advising me to be cautious about that and pushed me more towards a 4-year degree program.
And in the next 4 years, you guys will all be inundated with information. Yeah, exactly, Alice, about what different types of learning experiences and things like that are available to you after you finish high school. There's like 4-year degree programs where you get a bachelor's degree, which means that you learned how to do something, but you at least have this like stamp of approval that you can work a basic like job anywhere, kind of.
Right. And I think that's a lot of where their thinking was coming from, because they're like, oh, filmmaking, I mean, we don't know about that. Yeah. How do you actually make a living doing that? So I think they were speaking to that in terms of, you have a degree, you can use it for other things.
Yeah. And they were probably at the tail end of being right about that. Because
right.
I would say in the intervening 15 years or so, that has kind of ceased to be a fact. And I'm very open about telling my kids this. Don't rush to go to college right out of high school. It's not a good idea right now because of the nature of that beast. And your parents are going to push back against this, guys. I'm letting you know that because your parents are about Ben's and my age, maybe slightly older. And the paradigm that we were raised with was that you have to go to college if you want to have a decent life. And that has stopped being true in the last 15 or so years. It's the balance of college debt to return on that investment has changed. So just be aware of that. Do your own research, but be aware that like college debt is a serious thing, and you should not just be in a hurry to like sign a promissory note on a loan. End of PSA. I wanted to ask a follow-up question, and I will tell the class that I have met Ben's parents at premieres of his movies. They're very supportive people, and he's very lucky. So Alice, make sure that if you go to college, it's for something that you can immediately get a job in when you're done. That's all I'm going to say about that. So anyway, you went into filmmaking not with the goal in mind that you would be kind of just paying the rent editing other people's movies, but that you would be writing and directing your own.
Mm-hmm.
So how has that worked out, and how is it going? And this is a tough question for you, Ben.
Yeah, it's a balance. Mm-hmm. It's a balance, because if that's something you want to do, it's not something that people are going to pay you for off the bat. So I've made a handful of shorts. I've been fairly active in that. I feel like right now, and I'm sort of writing something longer, I want to try and transition out of that into something longer, both as a personal challenge and just something that, I thought I would do by now and haven't. But yeah, you have to keep that spark alive, but you also still have to pay the rent.
And that question of money comes back into it. I read yesterday that Stanley Kubrick, who made Dr. Strangelove, which we all watched a clip of when we were doing our screenwriting lesson.
Yeah.
His first
what clip?
It was Ripper and Mandrake in the office when Ripper is explaining to Mandrake that there's a commie plot to fluoridate water.
It's such a good movie.
It's so good. Anyway, I read that Kubrick's first movie was an anti-war movie that was just over an hour long, so very, very short for a feature. And he raised all the money himself, and sometimes he would run out of money to keep making the movie, so he'd go to Central Park and hustle people at chess to raise money for it.
That's a great story. I didn't know that.
And then he could turn around and keep working. And at the end of it, he disliked the movie so much that he attempted to have all the negatives burned. So all this stuff is like it can be a frustrating and a challenging career move. And this is why people, when you tell them you want to go into movies, they might look at you kind of funny. Kalis asks, did you think about money when you decided this career? Because
probably not, and probably should have. I don't know. I wasn't thinking that way when I was that age, but probably a good idea and I think people probably more have that awareness now than more so than I did. But yeah, think about it, and not just think about the importance of it to you. I mean, obviously, it's important that you need it to live. But do you want a lot of money? Can you be happy and content with just enough so you can sort of survive and do what you want?
And this also,
you want a little bit extra,
right?
And if you want to have kids,
right?
And you need a little bit more money. I mean.
And this does also kind of come back to a conversation about privilege, right? Like a lot of people, by the time you finish high school, you're not in a place. I mean, you were lucky, right? But like a lot of people finish high school, they're not in a place where they can afford to think of doing something without considering that financial aspect, right? And obviously, it wasn't something that you could afford not to think about, but it was something that you could afford to not be the determining factor in your decision making, which is lucky. And what I've started asking myself when I look around at the art world is, how does that fact kind of influence or determine what the landscape of our peers looks like? How does it determine who becomes an artist and who becomes well known as one?
Yeah.
That wasn't a question. Sorry, I'm like ranting.
I'm just nodding and agreeing.
Yeah. But yeah, Alice, you're absolutely right. That is something to consider, and you're very correct for bringing it up.
Yeah, definitely think about money and what you want your relationship to to be. Doesn't necessarily have to be about an accumulation of money, but realize that it's how the world works.
Well, let me ask this. Is there anything that is changing that landscape? Anything that might be happening within, let's say, the film world that is making it so that young people who have these creative ideas and that creative energy are able to bring them to filmmaking without having to worry about how they're going to pay the rent?
I mean, I think it's still a challenge for sure. I mean, there are certainly lots of different programs, grants, whatever, companies are offering, opportunities for, if you have an idea, submit things like that. The positive and minus, the positive and negative of, democratization of technology and all of that means you have much more opportunities to do or make, but also the outlets of getting it seen become more and more crowded.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. And I think perhaps what will happen and will continue to happen in the future is maybe you have more people who have careers in film, but there are less, we'll just say, Stanley Kubricks of the world.
Right.
Not like you become a well-known, famous artist person.
Yeah.
But
well, what about
there are more people and more diverse people making things.
What about things like TikTok? Because we have these social media platforms where people are being incredibly creative and they are working in the motion picture format. When you make a TikTok, when you're on TikTok, you are working in the motion picture format. And it's interesting because it has opened up this whole new kind of genre of motion picture production. And people are, I think there are some people who are making money that way, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about social media platforms and TikTok, and there'll probably be others in the future. If that's your medium and you feel really stimulated and creative, working in that, maybe explore that avenue. I mean, certainly you still have the roadblock of, how many people on TikTok and getting through, but percentage wise, you probably have a bigger chance of being seen than if you made a longer thing and tried to submit it to film festivals.
You heard it here. You heard it here, guys.
But yeah, it's also about balancing expectations. Is your goal to be famous? Is that possible? Is that not? I mean, I don't want to say no, but it's a pretty high expectation.
Yeah.
But certainly you can be creative and have a career and not be that. So same with money. What are your expectations? What do you want? And figuring that out.
I know what I want, which is for all of my students to have a wonderful rest of their day because we are out of time. Ben, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Sure.
Getting yourself out of bed and getting your coffee going and all that stuff. It's always nice to see you before noon.
Yeah.
8R2, thank you so much for your participation and your wonderful questions. If you have any follow-up questions for Ben, you can send them to me and I will forward them to him, and then I'll forward his answers back to you guys. if you're interested. This is going to go up on the class YouTube, so don't forget to hit like and subscribe and hit the notification button. And donate.
Good training for the future.
There you go. Ew, Alice says. Right on. Okay, guys, thank you for coming. Ben, thanks a lot. I'm gonna kill the meeting now.
Cool.
Thank you.
Nice
for
talking to everyone. Have a good summer. Stay creative. All that.
See ya.